We're talking today about the durability of the neocon consensus that brought about disaster in the last decade. It calls to mind how a bankrupt consensus in general can endure, even when it's been proven wrong. One way consensus endures is through forced conformity. The Obama presidency was supposed to be a repudiation of the forced conformity of the Bush administration, and it has in many ways. But this administration has also upped the ante on many aspects of the national security state. Under President Obama, 6 public employees have been accused under the Espionage Act, more than all administrations since World War II combined. ABC correspondent Jake Tapper challenged White House Press Secretary Jay Carney about the administration's crackdown on whistleblowers after 2 Western journalists were killed in Syria earlier this week.
The White House keeps praising these journalists who've been killed.
I don't know about keeps. I think.
Well, you've done it twice. Vice President Biden did it in a statement. How does that square with the fact that this administration has been so aggressively trying to stop aggressive journalism in the United States by using the Espionage Act to take whistleblowers to court?
Without addressing any specific case, I think that there are issues here that involve highly sensitive classified information, and I think that those are divulging that kind of information is a serious issue, and always has been.
So the truth should come out abroad, it shouldn't come out here.
Well, that's not at all what I'm saying, Jake, and you know it's not.
Jake Tapper, a bulldog, as always. Anne-Marie Slaughter, professor of politics and international affairs at Princeton University, is back with us at the table. Also joining us is Eyal Press, my colleague at The Nation. He has a wonderful new book. It's called Beautiful Souls, Saying No, Breaking Ranks, and Heeding the Voice of Conscience in Dark Times. It's about the moral bravery of whistleblowers and dissenters and the price paid by those who confront forced conformity in all its forms. Eyal, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for writing such a beautiful book. It's an exceptional piece of work.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Talk to me about why you undertook the project of looking at people that say no, and they span everything from people in the midst of war to someone in a financial firm. What was the impetus for the project?
Well, in a way, your introduction hints at it. We had a president elected in 2008 who campaigned on transparency, and I think has some sympathy for whistleblowers, or at least has stated it as such, then comes into office and enforces the Espionage Act more times than anyone before him. Why is that? Well, I think it's not surprising, and it's part of the reason I wrote the book. We have a much easier time admiring people who break ranks and go against the grain in the abstract and from a distance,
right,
and after the fact, 50 years later, we look at people who resisted the Nazis and we call them the righteous. When we find people who break ranks closer to us, who challenge our own government, who challenge our own beliefs, who get in the way of the agenda that in the politician's case they want to pursue, it becomes a different matter entirely. And I wanted to bring out some of that tension and really get people thinking in a more complicated way about what it means to break ranks.
I want to talk about some of the specific characters in the book, but someone who comes to mind in this conversation, we have not talked about much on the show, and I think partly because I have very conflicted feelings, is Bradley Manning, of course, who I think has become a kind of icon of this, and there are lots of people who think he's a traitor. Obviously, there are lots of people who think he's a hero. I want to show transcripts of an online chat that he had, in which he articulates his sort of rationale for doing what he did. Of course, he leaked, we think, I should say, suspected of leaking thousands of documents. I don't believe in good guys versus bad guys anymore. I guess I'm too idealistic. I had always questioned the thing worked and investigated to find the truth, but that was a point where I was part of something. I was actively involved in something that I was completely against. What do you make, having written this book about people that say no? Where do you see Bradley Manning as a figure falling in that?
Well, I don't know that much about Manning in particular as a sort of character, the way I know the characters I wrote about. But one of the most striking things in meeting people who did things like what Manning did was that they're the opposite, generally speaking, they're the opposite of what you picture when you look at a room and think, who's the rebel? Who is the person who's going to break ranks? All of the characters in my book are true believers. One of them even says that about himself. That is, they are people who took the ideals of the institutions they worked for very seriously, maybe too seriously. There was almost a kind of naivete that that, you know, if I work for a financial firm, in the case of my financial industry whistleblower, this is the United States. There's no fraud here. There's no corruption. And if there is fraud and corruption, well, the SEC will go after it, of course. This Layla Weidler, the financial industry whistleblower I profile, believed that to such a degree that she was shocked that her act wouldn't actually, you know, change things. In the case of some of the military people I look at, these were very idealistic soldiers. And
in terms of the reception of whistleblowers, and in Layla's case specifically, and that's why I think it does relate to Bradley Manning, is, you know, he was thrown into solitary. It's certainly not, there is no, you know, only in very, maybe he was kept in solitary for a very long time before charges were kept, were finally brought against him. There was a small group of people, I think, who did sort of view him heroically, but largely the full force of the state has been brought down upon him, and castigation and so forth. And that's one of the things that the amount of weight that comes down on people that do break ranks is something that you see in your book in very acute terms.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see how things change over time. We think of Daniel Ellsberg. I wasn't politically aware at the time. I was barely alive. But when Ellsberg leaks the Pentagon Papers, is he a hero? Certainly not to everyone. And I think there were equal amounts of scorn directed at him. How will Bradley Manning be viewed 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road? I think it will change. One of the reasons I think it will change is that I say in the book, I think Americans have a schizophrenic attitude towards whistleblowers and actual individual dissenters. In a sense, we romanticize these people. I mean, they speak to something very deep in American culture, American values. We teach Thoreau, the essay on civil disobedience, to high school students. And why do we do that? Because there's something very romantic and very American about someone standing against the corrupted institution on his or her own, no matter what happens. On the other hand, if you look at surveys and polls, which I cite in the book, we are a deeply conformist country. And we, when you look at the surveys asking to what extent should people follow their conscience if it means going against their country, even if their country's in the wrong. Well, America tends to end up last on that. Europeans are far ahead in saying people should break ranks, actually, in those cases.
These are polling and sort of investigating people's moral norms.
This issue embodies just the hotbed of liberal hypocrisy with the Obama administration, because the crackdown has been so outrageous. I mean, Stephen Kim at the State Department, a nuclear scientist who he was asked to speak to Fox News. What he told them was open source information. Now he's been, you know, under investigation, under house arrest for what, a year, just because, you know, the unprecedented crackdown. And of course, it's okay for top level officials to talk to Bob Woodward to leak the strategic assessment of Afghanistan, to ratchet up the, you know, the calls for increasing troops. They never pay any price whatsoever. It's always the low-ranking individuals, and there's such a disparate crackdown within the administration, and it also extends to the drone strikes, the level of secrecy, why that legal memo. I mean, the way Obama has seized executive power in that domain makes Dick Cheney blush.
In the case of, I don't quite agree with that, but I think in the case of Al-Awlaki, I think there is an important point here, which is that when the Al-Awlaki, who is of course an American citizen who was accused of being associated with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, was killed by a drone strike, and there was a lot of controversy over the legal basis by which you can kill an American in this way, you know, extrajudicially. And what happened was that shortly after it happened, there was a New York Times story, clearly leaked from official sources to the reporter, showing all the top secret documents that were the legal rationale for the strike.
Well, and the ACLU and the Center for Constitutional Rights are currently suing the Obama administration to make public the legal rationale for killing not only Anwar al-Awlaki, but then his 16-year-old son, who was also a U.S. citizen 2 weeks later. Another American citizen, Samir Khan, killed in the exact same strike as al-Awlaki. And, you know, I mean, the CCR and ACLU have fought and fought and fought, and they don't often win in these cases. But at the risk of agreeing with one of Condoleezza Rice's former aides, I did want to put this out. What I think makes the crackdown and attacks on whistleblowers all the more just awful is the position the Obama administration has taken on holding torturers accountable from the Bush era. When it comes to people who committed real crimes, who tortured people, who ripped fingernails off and squeezed testicles, those people get to walk around free. They get to walk around as normal citizens in this country because the president said we'll look forward, not backward. This administration, the Justice Department, has intervened in multiple lawsuits brought by torture victims' families against Rumsfeld and other officials. The Obama Justice Department has intervened to have them removed as defendants, as the Bush administration did too. This administration is letting these torturers walk away scot-free while then cracking down on whistleblowers.
There's more outcry about Bush-era detention practices than the outright killing of individuals by the Obama administration.
I want you to respond to this, but first I want to take this quick break. Great. Eyal, we were just talking about whistleblowing and some of these cases have been brought under the Espionage Act during the Obama administration. I wanted to give you a chance to...
Well, I wanted to weigh in to say, if we're going to talk about hypocrisy and whistleblowers and how they're treated, we should hardly limit the conversation to Barack Obama. George W. Bush signed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was supposed to guarantee protections for workers who blew the whistle on financial fraud and abuse. This was after the Enron WorldCom scandals. Everybody applauded. Everybody said, this is great. As I report in my book, I tell the story of a man who was a Bush supporter, a conservative Christian man, who was also the officer at a bank. He suspected fraud. He reported it. He was fired. He went to the Administration Review Board, an agency that was staffed by Bush appointees. He lost. He was not alone. The Wall Street Journal reported between 2002 and 2008, 12 people maybe 17 people who went to that board won their cases of something like 1,200.
Wow.
Another 800 were simply didn't have their cases heard.
And this was supposed to be the method by which whistleblowers were protected under Sarbanes-Oxley.
Right, whistleblowers who blew the whistle on fraud. Now then we get the 2008 financial crash, so you think, well, things are going to change, right? Whistleblowers who suspect these things are finally going to get some protections. Well, it turns out they did get some protections. Dodd-Frank actually has some important provisions that strengthen whistleblower retaliation, actually offer financial rewards to whistleblowers who turn in tips that lead to successful convictions. Well, how has that gone over? Republican Michael Grimm has proposed legislation, which has been adopted by a House subcommittee, that would gut those protections. No more financial reward. Workers have to go first internally to the company. If they go to the SEC and the SEC then does an enforcement action, they have to tip off the company about this enforcement action. So how does that square with individual rights, individual accountability, and all these things that we thought we support?
Can I zoom out for 1 second, because there's a story you tell at the beginning of the book that's really haunted me and stuck with me, and it's something that maybe people know about and I didn't know about. There's a famous massacre that you talk about during the Nazi era. I believe it happens in Poland, right? Mm-hmm. And tell that story, because it's really shaken me, actually, to hear this story.
It's an extraordinary story of one of the most brutal massacres in a very, very brutal war, and it took place in Poland. It was a battalion that was taken to a village and ordered to round up every Jew in the village, approximately 1,800 people, and take them into a forest and systematically murder them.
With guns, but killing all day long,
yes.
Essentially.
Now, we hear that story and we think, well, okay, in such a situation, this is war, this is a totalitarian country, there is no opportunity to exercise any kind of choice. If you do that, you're taking your own life. It turns out that before that massacre began, the major in charge gathered the men and he said, anyone in this unit, if the older men here do not want to participate, they do not have to participate. And a couple of the men stepped forward and didn't do it. I tell that story because, in a sense, this is the reason I wrote the book. I think we've lost a sense of the possibility of choice, the fact that even in situations of seemingly total conformity, you do have the people who don't go along, and we need to tell their stories, not least because otherwise, what do we say to the people who say, well, I was only doing what anyone in my shoes would have done?